Are you ready to learn the truth about what was hidden behind the facades of the most luxurious mansions of the century before last, where the sparkle of diamonds often overshadowed tears? The era we call the Gilded Age was a time of incredible wealth, but also a time when human destinies became bargaining chips in games for influence and titles. We often admire beautiful portraits of ladies in ball gowns without thinking about the high price they paid for their position in society. Behind every great alliance between American money and European aristocracy was not only a wedding, but also the quiet tragedy of a young woman deprived of her right to choose. They were married off to save the family estates from ruin or to buy their parents an entry ticket to high society. These were deals sealed at the altar, where cold calculation, duty, and the need to meet cruel expectations reigned instead of love. Watch the video to the end to find out how mothers built golden cages for their daughters with their own hands and why the title of Duchess often became synonymous with profound loneliness. What if I told you that everything you believed in when looking at romantic paintings of weddings of the past is not true? In fact, the marriage market of the late 19th century operated under the same harsh laws as any major financial exchange of the time. Wealthy American industrialists, who had amassed huge fortunes in railroads and steel, desperately needed the social recognition that money alone could not buy. The worst part was that this exchange was considered the norm, and any protest was perceived as black ingratitude towards one's parents. Girls were taught that love would come with time, or that it was not necessary for a happy and dignified marriage. They were taught to endure, smile, and wear heavy tiaras with the same dignity with which soldiers wear their uniforms. The outward glamour of wedding ceremonies, which were reported in all the newspapers, reliably concealed the inner emptiness of these unions. Only a few dared to whisper that behind closed bedroom doors there was alienation and coldness. For fathers, these deals were the pinnacle of their careers, proof that they had reached the top of the social ladder. They were proud that their grandchildren would be peers of England and did not notice the dull eyes of their daughters. In their world, success was measured not by happiness, but by the number of mentions in society columns and invitations to balls. Women became the living embodiment of this success, trophies to be displayed to envious competitors. But behind this triumph lay a huge human tragedy that was not to be spoken of aloud. History knows many examples when such marriages, made in heaven but paid for with checkbooks, turned into a real hell on earth. Young women found themselves completely isolated, far from home, friends, and their usual way of life. They had to adapt to foreign traditions where they were looked down upon as wild Americans. Their money was gladly accepted, but they themselves were often despised for their lack of manners and vulgar origins. It was a clash of two worlds, in which the fragile female psyche often could not withstand the pressure. Despite all the difficulties, these women had to play their roles to the end. Without showing the public a trace of disappointment, they became masters of pretense, creating the illusion of a perfect family for photographers and journalists. Their lives turned into an endless performance, where every gesture and glance was rehearsed. But inside, beneath layers of silk and lace, there was a deep longing for simple human warmth. They were the richest women in the world, but often could not afford the most important thing, to be themselves. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this approach to marriage? Was it a justified sacrifice for the sake of the family or cruel barbarism? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of the story. Are you ready to learn the truth about who was really behind these heartless unions? Often it wasn't the fathers, who were busy with business, who initiated these marriages, but the mothers who were obsessed with entering high society. For many ambitious matrons of the time, a successful marriage for their daughter became the main project of their entire lives. They themselves often suffered from the fact that the doors of the old aristocratic houses of New York were closed to them. Therefore, they decided to cross the ocean and buy what they were denied in their homeland. These mothers acted with the ruthlessness of generals planning a military campaign, where their daughters were mere pawns on a chessboard. They carefully studied lists of unmarried European aristocrats, compiled dossiers, and calculated potential benefits. The emotions and feelings of their daughters were either completely ignored or considered an annoying hindrance. Any attempts at resistance were suppressed with an iron fist, often using emotional blackmail. Daughters were made to believe that refusing a profitable match would bring shame on the whole family and betray their parents' hopes. Upbringing in such families was aimed at breaking the girl's will and turning her into an obedient tool. From an early age, they were forbidden to show character. Strict rules of etiquette were imposed on them, and they were taught to obey their elders. The mother became not the closest person, but a strict supervisor, controlling every step and glance. A wall of alienation grew between them, built from the unfulfilled ambitions of the older generation. Love was replaced by demandingness and care by strict control over appearance and manners. The pressure was enormous. Tears, hysterics, threats to disinherit, or even feigned heart attacks. Mothers masterfully manipulated their daughters' feelings, making them feel guilty for the slightest disobedience. The girl found herself trapped. On the one hand, fear of a future with someone she did not love, and on the other, fear of losing her family. As a result, most gave in, sacrificing themselves to their mother's ambitions. They walked down the aisle with their eyes downcast, knowing that their lives no longer belonged to them. However, society at that time fully supported such actions by mothers, considering them a manifestation of wisdom. Successfully marrying off a daughter was considered a woman's main duty and an indicator of social success. No one condemned the matron for her harshness. On the contrary, she was envied and imitated. This created a vicious circle in which each new generation of mothers repeated the mistakes of the previous one. The system reproduced itself, grinding down destinies to suit social norms. Do you think these mothers sincerely believed they were acting for the good, or were they motivated solely by selfishness? In the next chapter, you will learn about the physical and emotional trials that girls went through even before their wedding, preparing their bodies and souls for the role of living commodities. What I am about to show you was forbidden to discuss in polite society at the time, but it was a terrible reality. Preparing for the wedding and creating a dowry, or trousseau, became an exhausting ritual of farewell for the bride. It was not a joyful anticipation of a celebration, but rather resembled preparations for a coronation, where a person's identity is erased under the weight of regalia. Girls were forced to stand for hours during fittings, their bodies encased in stiff corsets that formed the perfect silhouette. Every centimeter of the waist was important, because it had to look flawless against the backdrop of the antique tapestries of the future home. Clothing in that era was not just fabric, but a complex construction that restricted movement and even breathing. Heavy velvet dresses, embroidered with pearls and gold thread, weighed dozens of kilograms. The bride had to learn to wear this armor with ease, without showing fatigue or pain. She was taught that beauty requires sacrifice, and that her body now belonged not to her, but to the family she was joining. It was physical discipline designed to suppress any spontaneity and liveliness of character. Endless lists of items to be ordered from Paris were compiled with accounting precision. Dozens of shirts, peignoirs, gloves, and stockings. Everything had to be of the highest quality. This dowry was put on display, discussed in the press, and became the subject of envy and gossip. The girl herself became invisible behind these mountains of lace, turning into nothing more than a mannequin to demonstrate her father's wealth. No one was interested in her individual taste. Everything was dictated by fashion and the demands of status. During this period, brides often suffered from nervous breakdowns, insomnia, and strange ailments, which were attributed to girlish impressionability. In fact, it was a protective reaction of the psyche to enormous stress and a feeling of hopelessness. Doctors prescribed sedatives and rest, but no one addressed the main cause: fear of the future. The girls felt cornered, surrounded by luxurious things that suffocated them. The portraits commissioned by famous artists of the time for their engagements were a particular torture. It was incredibly difficult to pose for hours in an uncomfortable position, maintaining a frozen smile. In these paintings, we see beautiful but cold dolls with empty eyes. Without meaning to, the artist captured the deep sadness hidden behind the glitter of jewelry. These portraits became the first exhibits in the gallery of their married life, marking the moment of transition into their husband's property. On their wedding day, many of them felt not joy, but numbness and fear of the unknown. The sparkle of diamonds could not warm them, and the admiring glances of the crowd could not replace love. They entered a new life, wrapped in silk and lace, like an expensive gift that no one asked if they wanted to receive. Don't forget to like if you were moved by the fate of these girls. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what awaited these girls on the other side of the ocean? Arriving in England was often a cold shower for American brides, shattering their last illusions. They expected to find themselves in a fairy tale of princes and castles, but instead found themselves in a world of cold, dampness, and snobbery. The ancestral estates that looked majestic in pictures often turned out to be huge, drafty mansions without heating or running water. American women accustomed to central heating and hot baths were horrified to discover that their new home was a beautiful refrigerator. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the emotional coldness that emanated from their new family. The British aristocracy greeted the dollar princesses with polite contempt, viewing them as a necessary evil. Mothers-in-law and sisters-in-law openly mocked their accents, manners, and even their clothes, considering them too bright and new. They were made to understand that money could buy a title, but it could not buy breeding and innate nobility. The girls found themselves isolated, surrounded by people who spoke the same language but did not understand them at all. Husbands, having gained access to their wives' bank accounts, often quickly lost all interest in them. For many aristocrats, marriage was just a way to pay off debts and continue their usual lifestyle: hunting, clubs, and horse racing. A young wife became just another piece of furniture, a necessary accessory, but not a partner. A husband could not show up in her bedroom for weeks or even leave for London, leaving her alone in the middle of nowhere. It was a humiliating neglect that hurt her pride and heart. Conversations at the dinner table were boring and formal, touching only on hunting, the weather, and gossip about neighbors. Any attempts to discuss politics, art, or literature were met with cold silence. The lively minds and education of American women were not valued here. They were required only to be silent presences and to bear heirs. Intellectual hunger became a constant companion in their life in a gilded cage. It was almost impossible to make friends with local ladies, as they saw them as invaders. The American community in London was the only outlet where they could be themselves. But even there, competition reigned. Who had married more successfully? Who had a higher title? Who had been invited to the Queen? It was a life of constant tension, with no opportunity to relax and trust anyone. This experience broke many, but it also tempered some, turning them into strong, powerful women. They learned to manage estates, intrigue, and get what they wanted. But the price of this transformation was too high: the loss of the ability to love and trust. Do you think the title of Countess or Duchess was worth such a life of eternal coldness? In the next chapter, you will learn what their daily lives were like behind the closed doors of luxurious bedrooms and what duty forced them to do. Married life for these women was subject to a strict schedule and set of responsibilities, the main one being the birth of an heir. As soon as the wedding celebrations died down, the young wife was expected to announce her pregnancy as soon as possible. It was not a matter of desire or readiness. It was a job for which her family had paid a huge amount of money. If pregnancy did not occur quickly, the atmosphere in the house became tense, and the woman began to be viewed as defective merchandise. Her body was seen exclusively as a vessel for continuing the ancient lineage, an incubator for the next duke. Relations with her husband often boiled down to rare and formal visits to the marital bedroom, devoid of any passion or tenderness. For many girls raised in puritanical strictness and ignorance, the wedding night was a shock and a trauma. The lack of emotional intimacy made physical contact mechanical and humiliating. They had to endure and fulfill their marital duty, suppressing disgust or indifference. No one cared about their pleasure or feelings, only the result mattered. If a girl was born, the disappointment of the husband and his relatives was obvious. The woman was blamed for failing to fulfill her main task, and the pressure continued until a son appeared. The phrase heir and spare was not a joke, but a strict requirement for the number of children. Every pregnancy was a health risk in an era when medicine was still far from perfect. But this risk did not stop anyone, because the dynasty had to continue at any cost. Their lives were filled with endless social rituals, visits, tea parties, charity balls. Every public appearance required perfect appearance and impeccable behavior. They could not show fatigue, bad mood, or illness. They were living symbols of their husband's status, and any mistake cast a shadow on his name. This publicity was exhausting work with no days off or vacations. They often outlived their husbands and only found long-awaited, albeit bitter, freedom in widowhood. But by that time, their best years were behind them, and the habit of submission and restraint had become second nature. They remained the guardians of the traditions that had once broken their lives. Their duty had been fulfilled, but the price had been paid with their own destiny. The story of these marriages is a story of how human warmth was sacrificed to abstract notions of honor and family. Women were the fuel that kept the machine of aristocratic society running. Without their money and their bodies, the system would have collapsed much earlier. But no one erected monuments to their patience and their silent feat of daily survival. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is that for many of them, moving to Europe was a one-way ticket to eternal emigration without the right to nostalgia. American women who married titled Europeans often cut themselves off from their homeland forever. Travel across the Atlantic at that time was time-consuming and expensive, so visits home were extremely rare. Women found themselves torn from their familiar surroundings, deprived of their roots and the support of old friends. They had to become more English than the English themselves in order to earn even a modicum of respect. Adapting to life in old Europe required a complete rejection of their American habits and views. American spontaneity, loud laughter, and openness were all considered bad manners here. They had to relearn how to walk, talk, laugh, and even think. It was a painful personality change, an attempt to squeeze themselves into the narrow confines of a foreign culture. They lived in constant fear of making a mistake and becoming a laughingstock for the stuffy society. Their longing for home became a constant, nagging pain. They missed American food, the pace of life, and the freedom of communication. Every piece of news from home, every newspaper from New York was read until it was worn out. They created little corners of America in their estates, ordering things and books from across the ocean. But this only emphasized their alienation in this old world. Their children, born and raised in Europe, often became strangers to them. They grew up to be true British aristocrats or French counts, absorbing the snobbery of their fathers. A son might be ashamed of his mother's simple origins and her accent. This was the most terrible price to pay for a title. To see your own child become part of a world that rejects you. They often died alone, far from the land where they were born. They were buried in their husbands' family crypts, under foreign coats of arms and surnames. Their titles were carved on their tombstones, but rarely was there any mention of who they really were. Their history dissolved into the history of the family they had saved, but which never accepted them as their own. The fate of these immigrants is a reminder of how difficult it is to live where you are not loved or wanted. No palace can replace the feeling of home and native soil. What do you think helped these women stay sane, far from their homeland? In the next chapter, you will learn how loneliness forced them to seek solace in the most unexpected things. Despite the constant presence of servants and an endless series of social events, these women were deeply lonely. Loneliness in a crowd is the most terrible of all kinds of isolation, when there are many people around, but not a single kindred spirit. At balls, they danced, smiled, and made small talk, but inside they felt an icy emptiness. No one asked them about their feelings, fears, or dreams. Everyone was only interested in the facade, the outward glamour of their position. This created the feeling of living in an aquarium, where everyone is looking at you, but no one can touch you. Others found solace in religion, immersing themselves in mysticism or charity. Building churches, hospitals, and shelters gave them a sense of purpose and meaning in life. By helping the poor, they felt like real people, capable of compassion and kindness. It was an area where their money brought real benefits, rather than simply supporting the prestige of their family. The gratitude of ordinary people was more sincere than the flattery of court sycophants. Some, despairing of finding love in marriage, had secret affairs, risking their reputation and position. These were dangerous relationships, full of fear of exposure, but they gave them what they so desperately lacked, the feeling of being desired and loved. Often, lovers were people outside their circle: artists, officers, politicians. These affairs were a breath of fresh air, but often ended tragically or in breakups. Society forgave men for their infidelities, but punished women harshly for the slightest indiscretion. Loneliness changed them, made them more observant, more profound, but also more unhappy. They understood the price of everything: money, titles, smiles, and promises. And this wisdom was as bitter as wormwood. They saw the underside of the glittering world and knew that behind every diamond there was someone's tear. Their lives proved that neither wealth nor high status guarantee happiness. On the contrary, these things often become insurmountable barriers to simple human joy. Their stories teach us to value sincerity and warmth in relationships above all else. The question of inheritance and the continuation of the family line was the central axis around which the entire life of an aristocratic family revolved. In this system, a woman was merely a link in the chain, a transmitter of blood and title from father to son. Her own personality, her desires and dreams were of no importance in the face of the eternity of the family line. Giving birth to a son was not just a desire, but a political and economic necessity that ensured the survival of the estate and title. If this did not happen, women felt the full weight of condemnation from their family and society. The fate of daughters in such families was no less predetermined. They were prepared to follow in their mother's footsteps. They too were destined for the bride market, a profitable marriage, and a life of duty. Mothers, knowing what awaited their girls, often had mixed feelings: pity and a desire to provide them with a better future. They taught their daughters to be strong, to hide their feelings, and to endure, passing on their bitter wisdom. This cycle was repeated from generation to generation, grinding down women's destinies. Conflicts between generations were inevitable, especially when children grew up and began to rebel against strict rules. Sons could lose fortunes at cards, daughters could run away with unsuitable suitors. For a mother, each such act was a blow, proof that her sacrifice had been in vain. She had to settle scandals, pay debts, and beg her husband to be lenient with the children. The burden of the dynasty weighed heavily on all participants in this drama, depriving them of their right to simple human choice. Both mothers and children were hostages to history, obliged to play their roles in an endless spectacle. Love in this system was just a nice bonus that not everyone got. The main thing was to keep the name, coat of arms, and estate for future generations. We can only guess what these women thought as they looked at the portraits of their ancestors in long galleries. Did they see them as supportive or silent jailers? Their contribution to the history of the family is invaluable, but their personal stories often remain written in tears and ink in secret diaries. Over the years, the role of these women in the family and society transformed, and it was often in their maturity that they found their true strength. When beauty faded, character, intelligence, and accumulated experience of survival in high society came to the fore. Becoming widows or matriarchs of the family, they finally gained the power and respect they had been denied in their youth. Now they dictated the rules, decided the fate of their grandchildren, and managed finances with the ruthlessness of experienced business people. It was their revenge for years of humiliation and silence. Relationships with their grown children often remained difficult, full of mutual resentment and grievances. The children remembered the coldness and distance, the mothers, the ingratitude and selfishness of their offspring. But outwardly, everything looked respectable. Family dinners, joint photos, Christmas gifts. The facade of the ideal family was maintained until the very end, even when there was nothing left behind it. Their homes became museums of their lives, filled with portraits, souvenirs, and memories. They wandered through empty halls where music and laughter once resounded, remaining guardians of the past. Old age brought physical infirmity, but the spirit of these women often remained unbreakable until their last breath. They were made of steel and lace, combining fragility with incredible willpower. Their lives are a lesson in resilience and the ability to maintain dignity in all circumstances. They went through fire and water, through contempt and flattery, remaining true to their duty. And even in old age, sitting in an armchair by the fireplace, they remained queens of their small, cold kingdom. History does not tolerate the subjunctive mood, but looking at their fates, one cannot help but wonder, was it worth it? Was this power and status an equal substitute for simple human love and warmth? The era that gave rise to the phenomenon of dollar princesses was fading into the past with the roar of the cannons of World War I. The world was changing rapidly. The aristocracy was losing its privileges, taxes were rising, and old estates were becoming a burden that was impossible to maintain. Many of the palaces for which American heiresses sacrificed their youth were sold, converted into schools or museums, or even demolished. It was the collapse of illusions, the final chapter in the history of the great bargain between money and titles. Social changes brought women new rights and opportunities that their mothers and grandmothers could not have dreamed of. The new generation of girls no longer wanted to be commodities on the marriage market. They demanded the right to choose, to get an education, and to have a career. The sacrifice of the gilded brides became a warning to their granddaughters, an example of how not to live. The institution of marriage of convenience did not disappear completely, but it ceased to be the only norm for high society. The fates of these women remind us that true values cannot be measured in carats and hectares. Happiness, love, and the freedom to be oneself are things that cannot be bought for millions. They paid for this lesson with their lives so that we could understand it today. Their story is a vaccine against vanity and a reminder of the importance of humanity. May their souls finally find the peace they were denied in life. And may we remember them not as soulless dolls in expensive dresses, but as living women with their pain, hopes, and unspent love. It was an era of glamour and tears, and we must not forget either. Thus ended the story of the greatest vanity fair in human history, leaving us with beautiful palaces and sad tales. We immersed ourselves in a world of luxury and hidden pain, learning the price women paid for the splendor of family crests. This story makes us think about how fragile happiness can be when it depends on the ambitions and cold calculations of others. How did the fate of these birds in golden cages make you feel? Would you like to see separate episodes about the fate of Consuelo Vanderbilt or Jenny Churchill? Write your suggestions in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new journeys into the mysteries of the past.